When I first started Ragnarok, I wish I had known how important the Hyperion Grapple skill is. Hyperion Pull, which is unlocked by default, lets you pull small enemies towards you, but Hyperion Grapple does the opposite, launching Kratos towards the enemy. Now, that might not seem very significant, but it's actually kind of a huge difference. See, both of these abilities help you close the gap between you and the enemy, which is important to keep the pressure on. But Hyperion Grapple also applies a lot of stun damage, and stun is really important. Also, this is a little more advanced, but Hyperion Grapple will actually also let you interrupt unblockable red ring attacks. It won't work on all of them, but for most unblockable attacks from small enemies, using Hyperion Grapple will let you power through it. But the big thing is that stun damage, and stun is a mechanic you definitely don't want to sleep on. If you can build up the gray stun bar under an enemy's health bar all the way, it'll trigger a stun grab, which lets you deal a big chunk of damage very easily. And by the way, you get invincibility frames for the entire animation, so you're totally safe while doing stun grabs. When the prompt is yellow, you'll just deal a chunk of damage, but if it's red, that indicates you'll kill the enemy. So don't rush to do those yellow ones right away. If the enemy's health is low enough, you can deal a little more damage while they're down to get the prompt to turn red so you can get the easy kill. Now, you're not going to trigger stun grabs on bosses, but you still want to think about applying stun because when you build up that bar all the way on a boss, you still get a big chunk of damage on them. So if you want to build up stun fast, it sounds kind of strange, but you actually want to put Kratos' weapons away. Remember, our guy's literally a god, and his fists can deal a lot of damage too, and they're really good for stun damage. Kratos' weapons do deal a little bit of stun damage, but attacking with bare fists and the shield is actually way more effective for stun buildup. Just remember that stun will quickly start to degrade if you don't keep the pressure on. So try to keep landing a hit here and there, even if they're just little taps to keep the stun bar up. You should also know that hitting an enemy in the back will boost stun buildup a lot. It's definitely tricky to get around behind an enemy, but just keep that in your back pocket for when you get the chance. And remember, it can be a bit easier to get behind enemies by toggling off the target lock-on. But what's even easier is pinning enemies up against a wall. With their back to a wall, they'll take increased stun damage as well, but it doesn't matter where you hit them. So that's often easier to pull off. But by far the best way to build up stun is learning to parry with the Dauntless shield. There are 5 shields in the game, and all of them except the Stonewall can parry, but the Dauntless will apply increased stun. And more importantly, its special shield bash ability deals a ton of stun. You charge this up by hitting parries and perfect parries, and unleash it by double tapping the block parry button. I think a lot of players avoid the Dauntless because it's branded as a parry-only shield, but you can still block normally with it just like any other shield. So there's really no big downside to using it, and it's very rewarding if you invest a bit of time into getting good at parrying. We'll check out a bunch more combat tips in a second, but first let me show you some important skills you don't want to miss out on grabbing early. We already talked about Hyperion Pull and Grapple for the blades. Pull is unlocked by default, but I would definitely grab Grapple as one of your first skills. But the very first skill I think you should unlock is Frozen Ascent for the axe. This is great for 2 things. First, it's a great way to apply a lot of frost buildup, and we'll talk about why that's important in a minute. But second, Frozen Ascent is also great for launching enemies into the air where you can start juggling them. Juggling might sound kind of advanced, but it's actually pretty easy, and it keeps you quite safe because the enemy is basically helpless. With Frozen Ascent, it's actually really easy to pop an enemy up, and then you just need to spam light attacks to keep them airborne. Just remember, to use Frozen Ascent, you need to charge the axe with Frost Awaken first. I would also grab Glacial Rake early on. This is another great way to apply frost buildup because you can simply hold down the light attack button and do Glacial Rakes repeatedly. But in groups, it can be easily interrupted, so to make it much more effective, you can dodge between Glacial Rakes to cut the animation short. We talk more about that in my combat masterclass, but you want these good methods of applying frost because elemental synergies are really strong. What I mean by that is applying one elemental status effect and then using it to enhance damage from another. To start using this powerful mechanic, we need 2 really important skills: Extinguish Flames for the axe and Vaporize Frost for the blades. With those unlocked, what you want to do is build up either the frost state on an enemy with the axe or the burning state with the blades, and then switch to the opposite weapon to deal damage. Attacking an enemy that's either burning or frosted with the opposite elemental weapon will deal a lot of bonus damage. And if you're not doing this already, you totally should be. Just remember, it has to be melee damage to get the benefit. So any sort of regular light or heavy attack works, or any of the melee combos found in the melee skill tree for either weapon. Now, I tend to prefer getting enemies burning first and then dealing damage with the axe, and there's a couple of reasons for that. For one, the axe just generally deals bigger chunks of damage, but the main reason is because the burning state deals damage over time. So while I'm dealing chunks of damage with the axe, I'm also stacking that with some damage over time from burning. I also find that the skills you can use to apply the burn state have more range, simply because the blades have more range, and they also have a larger AoE. So it's easy to apply the burning state to multiple enemies around you, or to a single enemy from a safer distance. The best ways to apply burn are by charging up a flame whiplash and then tapping light or heavy attack to do a scorched sweep or scorched earth. Sweep is unlocked by default, but earth is better because it deals more burn buildup, so I would definitely grab that early on too. You're also going to want to prioritize getting the Immolation skill for the blades and its equivalent for the axe, which is called Permafrost. We won't go too deep into it right now because I cover it in detail in my combat masterclass, but both of these skills enable you to build up the elemental gauge next to your health bar. And when you fill this up using either weapon, they'll both deal additional damage and apply elemental buildup with every hit. I would also recommend grabbing the Serpent Snare skill early on. This one lets you grab an enemy with the axe and chuck them, which deals a lot of damage and also results in a frost explosion that can hit nearby enemies. And if you're near a ledge, you can even use this to chuck enemies straight off, taking them out in one shot. By the way, you can do something similar by blasting them back with the Dauntless Shield special ability. Now, you've probably noticed I have these extra little icons on some of my skills. These are your skill labors, which you'll unlock by using a skill a bunch of times. The game briefly tells you about these, but what it doesn't really explain is that it doesn't matter which one you choose when you unlock one for a skill. You can switch between them anytime. So even if you're not sure which one you want yet, you don't want to hold off on unlocking them. You can try one out and then switch to a different one for free whenever you'd like. Of course, you can just wait to unlock the labors naturally as you play, but if you want them more quickly, you can use the practice arena in Niflheim to unlock them fast. You'll gain access to Niflheim pretty early on by simply progressing the story, and it's a great place to practice combat even if you're not trying to unlock your skill labors. But you might notice while practicing or just playing, especially if you're using a controller, that Kratos will sometimes spin 180 when you don't want him to. To fix that, you can toggle off the quick turn setting here under the control remapping settings. Quick turn lets you instantly spin 180 to keep track of enemies, and if you're on keyboard and mouse, the default settings might not be a problem. But if you still want to be able to quick turn on controller and you have a PlayStation controller, then I would map it to one of the touchpad swipe options here under the gameplay settings. And there's actually a few other settings you might want to adjust while we're in here. For example, if you find the puzzles a little frustrating, you can change the puzzle timing setting to make them easier. I like to change the auto pickup setting. By default it's off, but I really like the economy setting, which allows you to automatically pick up loot but leaves health and rage stones alone so that you don't end up using one to heal just a tiny bit by accident. Navigation assist is also nice to have turned on. If you get a little disoriented, you can just press the button and Kratos will turn towards the current objective. I also prefer to change the repeated button presses setting to hold instead of tap. That's just for cutscene prompts anyway, so why not make it simpler? Traversal assist is another great quality of life one. I put this one on auto so Kratos automatically moves over obstacles, jumps gaps, and jumps down from ledges. Auto plus is good too, but it can get annoying when he starts climbing down a chain or something when you didn't mean to, so I prefer auto. If you get annoyed with Atreus telling you how to solve a puzzle, I think it's great there's a reduced puzzle hint setting you can turn on. And if you don't like the game pausing every time you alt-tab on PC, then you'll want to turn off this pause on focus loss setting. I also definitely like changing weapon sheathing to the weapon toggle option. This makes it so you can hit the weapon buttons to both take them out and put them away instead of needing to press the dedicated button to go barehanded. In graphics and camera, I'll let you decide what you want for display scaling and quality depending on your system if you're on PC. But for everyone, down in the graphics section, I would definitely recommend turning film grain and motion blur off. These are artistic effects that create additional image artifacting and blurriness, so turning them off will improve image clarity and maybe give you a few extra FPS on PC. Ragnarok also has some of the best accessibility features in any game. For example, if you're colorblind, you'll definitely want to check out the text and color settings to change the UI color correction to a mode that's better for you. But even if you're not colorblind, down below that we have all sorts of toggles to colorize different things in the game. For example, if you find it difficult to find Odin's Raven or some of the puzzle objects you need to throw the axe at, you can turn on the target color setting to make them more obvious. Oh, and by the way, if you see these little stone puzzle objects early on, or these steam vent looking things, don't worry, you're not missing something, you just need a special item you get later in the game. But another way to find those ravens more easily is to turn subtitles on and then also turn on the direction indicator setting, which adds an arrow pointing to the source of sounds. You definitely do want to hunt down those ravens, by the way. They're not just a collectible. In Niflheim, you'll actually find the ravens you've collected hanging out in a tree, and as you collect more, they'll unlock chests that have pieces of the Raven tier's armor in them. You need 18 ravens to get all 3 pieces of armor, and then every set of 10 after that will unlock the other chests, which each have a heavy runic attack in them. Speaking of runics, don't forget that they're actually upgradable, and you can upgrade them anytime from your menu. You don't need to go to Brock and Sindri like you do to upgrade armor. I was also really pleased to see at the end of my first playthrough that there's actually no trash armor in Ragnarok. Every set of armor, even the survival gear you have at the very start of the game, can be upgraded to max level 9 and is viable in the endgame. In fact, the survival gear becomes the best option for a balanced stats build when fully upgraded. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily the best build. I've got a whole video on much better endgame builds, but it is cool that all your gear remains useful throughout the entire game. So as you progress, you will find armor sets that start out at a higher base level, but all armor can be upgraded to create endgame builds. It is kind of pricey to upgrade armor though, so I would hold off on doing that until you get through the first part of Svartalfheim, basically until you meet Durlin. I've got a dedicated video on the best early game build, but basically you'll want to make sure you clear the mining rigs in Svartalfheim before heading up the mountain in the minecart. But at a bare minimum, take a serious look at some of the other early game options before you just go for Vidar's because it has the most strength. For example, the Risen Snow set is actually pretty balanced for the very start of the game, and if you got the deluxe edition, the Darkdale gear is a good option too. Every piece of armor in the game provides a special bonus, though you will have to upgrade some of them a level or 2 before you unlock it. In any given armor set, the chest piece has a unique bonus, and then the wrist and waist pieces share the same one. So if you use matching wrist and waist pieces, the bonus will be enhanced. Now there's a bunch of gear in the game, but I want to make sure you don't miss one of the best blade attachments, which you can miss really early on in Svartalfheim, specifically in the Jarnsminde pit mines. The pommels of the Undying Spark increase damage over time from the burn status, and they also provide a solid amount of strength and Runic, both important stats to boost. I literally use these pommels in my endgame build, so they're really good, but if you don't grab them when you're at the mines the first time, you won't be able to go back for most of the game. It's not totally obvious how to get over to them, but you basically need to pull this sluice over with the blades to change where the water's dumping, which causes the big crane to swing around with a block that you can grapple up onto. Then you need to freeze the water in that same sluice to make the crane swing back over with you on it. Wait for it to get all the way around, then grapple over to this ledge and run up to the end of the trail where you'll find a chest with the pommels. Some areas are also blocked by branches and roots, and for some reason it often takes 2 burns with the Blazing Surge skill to destroy them. So don't give up on these if they don't burn up on the first try. Give it a couple burns and you'll get through. You'll find artifacts while you're exploring as well, like the Kvasir poems. You'll want to check every once in a while to see if you can sell these to Brock and Sindri for some extra Hacksilver. Don't worry, even if you sell them, the lore entry is added to the artifacts list in the goals tab so you can read them later. Svartalfheim is also where you'll unlock Atreus' Sonic arrows, which I think a lot of players sleep on. Sonic actually helps build up stun pretty fast, and like we discussed earlier, stun is really useful. The Sonic arrow quiver recharges pretty quickly, so anytime they're available, you just want to spam Sonic arrows to apply additional stun damage. If you hit a Sonic inflicted enemy, it'll radiate pulses out that stagger surrounding enemies, which is pretty nice for crowd control. Atreus also gets his own skill tree in Ragnarok, and while not all the skills will be available right away, you should absolutely keep an eye out for Sonic Resonance and Echoes to enhance the Sonic Radiation effect and make it apply stun to the surrounding enemies. You should also make a habit of using the single tap dodge instead of the double tap roll whenever possible. The single tap dodge does have some iframes, so it's safer than it looks, and it allows you to stay closer to the enemy to resume dealing damage and keep the pressure on. A single tap dodge actually doesn't interrupt the basic attack combo either, so if you get back to it right away, you can just continue the combo where you left off, which helps you get to the final powerful move more often. But there's actually an even easier way to shortcut your way to the final powerful moves of both the light and heavy attack combos, and we cover that in this video right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you over there in just a second.